When I got home to my apartment, my wife was packing her things and getting ready to leave. I hadn't been home, she had no idea where I had run off to, and she was more than upset. It took a while, but I calmed her down, told her I just went a little nuts, and I was sorry and it wouldn't happen again. I worked for a tree company in South Jersey at the time, and my father-in-law was the foreman whom I rode 2 hours with every day, so I tried to have everything patched up and get rested by Monday morning. Some time went by, maybe a year, maybe two. I needed a hard-to-find part for my wife's car, and I remembered a huge junkyard outside of Washington way up on a mountain called Cobers. So I took a ride up only to find big truck after big truck driving down off the mountain, hauling every car in the place out of there. It turned out the junkyard closed up. So I stopped in a diner in Washington and had some breakfast before I started back down Route 31. I decided to make a pit stop in Hampton and see how Ed, Greg, and Chad were doing. When I pulled up, Greg came out of the garage to greet me. He was putting a stereo in his new truck he had just gotten for himself. He was happy to see me and called out, "Oh, Fredericks of Hollywood," as he sometimes called me. But as he got closer, I noticed a really big scar on the side of his face. It looked like he had been in some kind of bear attack or something. I asked him what happened, and he told me he had gotten really drunk one night and tried to blow his head off with a rifle in the garage. Apparently he had kind of missed and blew out the side of his face. I didn't know Greg all that well outside of the brief time I knew him, so I couldn't possibly understand what would lead to something like that, but I was pretty surprised, as he did seem like a happy guy to me. He kind of shrugged it off and took me in the garage to show me his new truck. It was a brand new deep blue Chevy S10. It was a really nice little truck and he was all smiles. I said hello to everyone else while I was there, talked for not too long, and soon headed back home. I thought to myself on the long drive back how strange it seemed that Greg took a gun to his head. Greg, Chad, Ed, and company seemed like they were living life just fine, and then some tragedy like that happens. Not too long afterward, I started to take a serious interest in joining the military. It was something I always had in the back of my mind, although I never shared it with any of my friends. Pretty strange thing to have on my list, being I was an aspiring rock star. But I always thought that's what men did. Most figures I've had as an example in my life had joined the military or were drafted and served in World War II or Vietnam. And by that time, I thought it was a sure ticket for my wife and I to finally get the hell out of Lambertville. There was an Army Guard base in Washington that I had been in touch with, and a recruiter there invited me to take a drive up and offered to talk about what I had to do with myself before being able to join anything, being I was a high school dropout and all. I made the trip up, he told me about different jobs in the Army, and he directed me to any GED programs in the area, contact info, and so on. On the way back, south on Route 31, I got the inclination to drive through town, past the house I lived in as a teenager. When I passed the house, I slowed down to look at the porch light because I noticed it was on. It struck me in a strange way that I didn't ever remember seeing it on before, because we had no electricity for practically the whole time we ever lived there. And believe me, that house was cold. As I slowed down in front of the house, I heard, "Hey!" It was Chad. He had moved into the next house over. He happened to be in the driveway and noticed it was me driving past the old house. Crazy coincidence. Naturally, I pulled over to catch up with him and shoot the breeze for a few. He told me he was living there with his then-girlfriend Zelma. In conversation, I asked how his family was and how Greg was doing. He told me that Greg was killed. I was besides myself and speechless. One night, Greg and a friend of his were really buzzed up and driving in Greg's new truck. There were some girls in a car ahead of them speeding down a back road, and Greg was chasing after them with his truck. When the girls reached a T in the road, they made a quick turn to avoid a boulder just past the stop sign. I've seen that boulder. Greg didn't make the turn. He was killed on impact. I just didn't know what to say. I felt horrible for Chad and his family. I immediately felt guilty for not knowing and not being at a funeral for Greg. Even if someone went out of their way to tell me the news, I had no home phone, there was no Facebook, and no cell phones. What a tragic thing to hear. After he had cheated death somehow, with a gun to his head, and soon after, he was gone. He was just a kid. The family must have been torn to pieces. How do you even process something like that? If that wasn't enough, Chad's mother died from a brain illness soon after as well. She was the nicest woman, and also way too young to die. Whenever I was around, she treated me with the utmost kindness, as did the rest of the family. I'll always remember them as being nothing but warm and inviting toward me. My heart still goes out to Chad and his father. I hope they've both been strong, inside and out, through all the years gone by.